Have you ever looked across a dining table and realized the people smiling at you are just parasites wearing familiar faces? They do not just want a piece of your pie, they want the entire bakery. This is the story of how my own flesh and blood tried to steal my sanctuary, and how I let their greed become the exact trap that destroyed them a million times over. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Everly Hunter. I am 32 years old and I hold the title of Director of Strategy at Apex Stratagem Partners. I want to make one thing perfectly clear from the very beginning: I did not inherit a trust fund, and I did not stumble into sudden fortune. I sacrificed my entire 20s to build my career. While my peers were out partying or traveling the world to find themselves, I was living out of a corporate suitcase. I was running on 4 hours of sleep, missing holidays, and ignoring my own physical health just to climb the ladder in a notoriously cutthroat industry. All of that blood, sweat, and relentless anxiety was poured into a single concrete goal. I wanted a sanctuary, and I finally earned it when I bought my beautiful coastal cabin in Carmel by the Sea, California. It was my private refuge from the noise of the world, paid for in full by my own absolute exhaustion. The dinner that triggered the collapse of my family was supposed to be a joyful celebration. I had reserved a private dining room at an obscenely expensive French restaurant right in the heart of the city to toast the recent engagement of my younger brother Declan and his new fiancée Sloane. I was covering the entire check naturally. That had slowly become the unspoken permanent rule of our family dynamic: Everly makes the money, so Everly pays for everything. Declan had always been the golden child, coasting through life on undeniable charm and zero accountability. Sloane, on the other hand, was a woman whose entire existence seemed artificially constructed for an audience of strangers. She desperately wanted to be a social media influencer. She spent the first 20 minutes of our dinner rearranging the breadbasket and adjusting the lighting just to take pictures of food she barely intended to eat. We were exactly halfway through a bottle of vintage wine that cost more than my very first car when the mood suddenly shifted. Declan tapped his crystal glass with a silver fork, clearing his throat to command the room. "Everly," he began, flashing that practiced boyish grin that my parents always fell for without fail. "Sloane and I have been talking seriously about our future and our wedding registry. We realized we do not want cash, and we definitely do not need standard gifts like blenders or bed sheets. We want something that will truly set up our future and build our legacy." "Okay," I said, leaning back in my chair and taking a slow sip of wine. "What exactly did you have in mind?" He looked over at Sloane, who gave him an encouraging, overly rehearsed nod. He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation. "We want the Carmel house, not to borrow for the honeymoon. We want you to sign the deed over to us as our lifelong wedding gift. It would be the absolute perfect permanent backdrop for Sloane to build her lifestyle brand." I let out a loud, genuine laugh. It was a terrible, completely absurd joke. There was simply no other logical explanation. But as my laughter echoed against the heavy velvet curtains of the private room, the smiles on their faces did not waver for a single second. I looked across the table at my parents, Arthur and Martha, fully expecting them to scold my brother for being so tasteless and ridiculous. Instead, my mother reached across the pristine white tablecloth and gently patted my hand, looking at me with an expression of deep, serene expectation. "It makes perfect sense, sweetie," Martha said in a soft, reasoning tone. "You are so incredibly successful. You have so much abundance in your life, and your brother is just starting out on his journey. As his older sister, it is only right that you make a little sacrifice to help him build his foundation." My father Arthur nodded in solemn, heavy agreement, folding his arms across his chest. "Family sacrifices for family, Everly. You work all the time anyway. You barely even have the free time to use that beach house. It is a complete waste just sitting there empty when Declan and Sloane could utilize it every single day for their careers. My blood turned to absolute ice. My heart stopped hammering and settled into a cold, heavy rhythm. Before I could even formulate a verbal response to the sheer suffocating audacity of my own parents, Sloane reached down into her oversized designer tote bag. She pulled out a thick, professionally bound portfolio and slid it smoothly across the table until it rested right next to my wine glass. "I have already mocked up the mood boards and floor plans," Sloane chirped, her voice dripping with an artificial, sugary sweetness that made my stomach turn. "We are going to gut the kitchen, obviously. Dark wood is so incredibly dated. We are bringing in imported white marble and knocking down the entire sea-facing wall to create an open-concept flow for my morning yoga live streams. The brand synergy we could generate from that property will be incredible." I stared down at the glossy printed pages. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had planned this. This was not a spontaneous, drunken request from an overly ambitious little brother. This was a highly calculated ambush. They had sat around likely in my parents' living room drinking coffee and plotting exactly how to extract a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate from me, because they felt fundamentally entitled to my life's work. The silence in the room stretched on for a solid 45 seconds. The tension was thick enough to choke on. I slowly closed the portfolio, pushed it back across the table so hard it almost fell into Sloane's lap, and stood up from my chair. "No," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, lacking any trace of the warmth I had walked in with. Declan blinked, his confident grin finally dropping into a frown of confusion. "What do you mean, no? Come on, Everly, do not be greedy. You make more than enough. You can always just buy another place." "I mean absolutely categorically and permanently no," I replied. I looked directly into the eyes of my parents, then shifted my gaze to my brother and his parasite of a fiancé. "That house is mine. It will always be mine. You are not getting the deed. You are not getting the keys. And you are certainly not gutting my kitchen for your fake internet friends. Everly Hunter, sit down right now and stop being so utterly selfish," my mother hissed, her face flushing a deep, angry red with indignation. "We raised you to care for your family." "I am paying the bill on my way out," I said coldly, completely ignoring her outburst. I picked up my coat and my purse. "Congratulations on the engagement. Do not ever bring up my property again." I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the four of them trapped in a stunned, furious silence. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I thought setting that firm boundary would be the end of the discussion. I had absolutely no idea that I had just fired the very first shot in what would quickly become a ruthless, scorched earth war. The silence that followed that dinner was absolute. For the first 48 hours, my phone did not ring a single time. There were no texts from my mother asking about my day, no random memes from my brother. It was a calculated, freezing isolation designed to make me crack, to make me reach out and apologize for defending my own property. But I had spent over a decade in corporate warfare. I knew how to hold a line. When the silence failed to break me, the digital bombardment began. It started subtly on social media. My mother began sharing passive-aggressive quotes on her Facebook page. Images with text about how money changes people and how blood should always be thicker than water flooded her timeline. My father would comment on them with praying hands emojis. They were actively curating a narrative, painting a portrait of a greedy, heartless villain and leaving a perfectly sized cutout for me to fit into. Then Sloane escalated the campaign. She took to TikTok. I did not even have the app installed on my phone until a colleague sent me a link with a worried message. The video featured Sloane sitting on the floor of a dimly lit bedroom, wearing an oversized sweater, clutching a mug with both hands, and crying beautifully. She possessed that terrifying ability to shed a single perfect tear that never ruined her makeup. "I just feel so broken today, you guys," she whispered to the camera. "We had this beautiful dream for our life together, and someone we trusted, a family member who has more wealth than they could ever need, decided to crush it just out of spite. It is so hard when toxic people try to gatekeep your happiness just because their own hearts are empty. She never used my name. She did not have to. Within 72 hours, that video had amassed 2 million views and over 40,000 comments. Strangers from all over the world were tearing me apart in the comment section. They called the anonymous villain a corporate leech, a jealous spinster, and a sociopath. Sloan would reply to these hateful comments with a simple heart emoji, silently validating every single threat and insult directed at me. The psychological weight of knowing thousands of people were wishing for my downfall, manipulated by a girl who just wanted a free beach house, was utterly suffocating. My parents shifted their tactics to direct psychological warfare. My inbox started filling up with unhinged articles forwarded by my father about the spiritual karma of hoarding wealth. My mother resorted to leaving lengthy sobbing voicemails. "You are destroying this family," Martha cried into the phone late one Tuesday evening. "You are completely ruining your brother's future. How can you sleep in that giant empty house knowing you have broken his heart? You have torn our lineage apart over bricks and wood." I deleted the messages, but the anxiety had already set up camp in my chest. The breaking point, however, the moment the family drama mutated into a genuine threat to my survival, happened when I opened an industry networking forum. There prominently displayed was an anonymous blind item article. It warned young professionals about a certain female strategy director at Apex Stratagem Partners who preached corporate ethics but ruthlessly abused and exploited her own immediate family in her private life. The article claimed this executive was facing severe mental instability. My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just about angry relatives whining on the internet. They were actively attempting to torch my professional reputation, the very foundation of my livelihood. The final sickening blow landed 2 days later. I received a frantic phone call from the property manager, who kept an eye on my Carmel home during the week. She told me a batch of official letters from the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Internal Revenue Service had arrived in the mailbox. They were not addressed to me. They were addressed to Declan. My stomach plummeted as the reality of the situation locked into place. My brother had gone to the government and officially changed his primary mailing address to my property. He was establishing a legal paper trail of residency. It was a calculated, chilling move. If he could prove he received mail there and somehow gained physical access, evicting him under state tenancy laws would become a prolonged, agonizing nightmare. They were trying to build a legal claim to my sanctuary without ever asking for a key. Any lingering feelings of familial guilt evaporated instantly. They were entirely replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought the threat of public humiliation and professional ruin would force me to hand over the deed just to make the nightmare stop. They had severely misjudged who they were dealing with. I did not call my parents to beg for peace. I did not post a defensive response to Sloan's viral videos. Instead, I withdrew $25,000 from my savings account. I spent my lunch break sitting in the heavily soundproofed office of a high-end private investigator known for his absolute discretion. Immediately after that, I hired a formidable attorney who specialized in both intellectual property and aggressive real estate litigation. I needed to know exactly why Sloan was so obsessively fixated on my specific property. The glossy portfolio she had shown me at dinner was too polished, too urgent. There was a hidden motive, a financial angle they were keeping completely hidden. I was going to find out exactly what it was, and then I was going to tear their entire world down. It was a Wednesday morning, exactly 10 o'clock, and I was in the middle of presenting a critical financial forecast to the executive board when my smartwatch began vibrating violently against my wrist. I tried to ignore it, continuing my breakdown of the third quarter margins, but the buzzing was relentless. It was not a standard notification. It was the emergency red alert from my smart home security system in Carmel. I excused myself, stepped out into the quiet corporate hallway, and pulled up the live high-definition camera feed on my phone. My heart slammed against my ribs. There on the crisp screen was not just a lone trespasser. It was a full-scale commercial invasion. A massive white production truck was parked aggressively across my driveway, crushing my manicured shrubs. 3 men in heavy work boots were physically slicing through the heavy steel padlock of my front gate with an industrial angle grinder. Sparks were flying violently into the morning air, and standing right behind them, holding overpriced iced coffees and pointing excitedly at my front porch, were Declan and Sloan. I did not even go back into the boardroom to collect my laptop. I sprinted straight to the elevator, dialing the local police department dispatcher, while running toward my car in the underground garage. I told them a coordinated break-in was actively occurring at my property involving multiple suspects and heavy equipment. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The drive down the coast usually took over 2 hours. I made it in 85 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. My mind was racing, trying to process the sheer, unadulterated madness of what I had just witnessed. When I finally skidded to a halt on the gravel shoulder outside my property, the scene was utterly chaotic. 2 police cruisers had successfully blocked the production truck from entering the main driveway, their red and blue lights flashing brightly in the coastal fog. 3 armed officers had the entire film crew lined up against the wooden fence. Declan and Sloan were arguing wildly with a police sergeant, their faces flushed with panic and indignation. I slammed my car door shut and marched straight toward the group. "I am the legal owner of this property," I announced loudly, my voice cutting sharply through the noise of the running truck engine. "I want every single one of these people arrested right now for breaking and entering." A man holding a thick metal clipboard, clearly the director of the filming crew, stepped forward with a look of absolute confusion and frustration. "Wait a minute. Hold on," the director said, raising his hands defensively. "We are not breaking in anywhere. We have a fully executed legal location release and a 3-month lease agreement. We are completely cleared to start shooting the pilot episode today." "That is entirely impossible," I snapped back, glaring at Declan, who suddenly looked like a cornered rat. "I never signed a single piece of paper." The director pulled a thick stack of stapled documents from his clipboard and confidently handed it to the police sergeant. The officer reviewed the first page, frowned, and then looked at me. "Ma'am, this commercial lease is signed by an Arthur Hunter, acting as the authorized legal guarantor for the primary tenant. Declan Hunter," the officer explained calmly. I snatched the paperwork from the officer's hand. My eyes rapidly scanned the dense legal text, and the horrifying massive truth finally clicked into place. The private investigator I had hired earlier that week was absolutely right. There was a massive hidden financial motive. Sloan and Declan had not just wanted a free house to take cute pictures in. They had secured a highly lucrative multi-episode contract with a trashy reality television network. The working title printed at the top of the contract was something incredibly tacky about the dramatic lives of ultra-rich newlyweds. They had literally sold the rights to film inside my multi-million-dollar home, portraying my hard-earned asset as their own personal playground to secure a massive production deal. But they needed undeniable proof of ownership or a valid long-term lease to satisfy the strict legal department of the production company. That was exactly where my parents had stepped in to help. Arthur and Martha had taken it upon themselves to forge a fraudulent power of attorney document. They used their status as my parents to act as guarantors, signing legally binding contracts that allowed Declan to successfully impersonate the property owner to the media executives. They had crossed a massive line, actively committing felony fraud and risking severe federal charges, all to ensure my little brother got his 15 minutes of fame on national television. They were perfectly willing to let a dozen strangers trample through my sanctuary with heavy cameras and lighting rigs for 90 days straight, fully assuming I would just quietly fold under the pressure once the television cameras started rolling. I stood on the damp gravel of my driveway, the wind whipping my hair across my face, holding the fraudulent contract. The police sergeant was waiting for my final word to slap handcuffs on my brother and the filming crew. My thumb hovered over the screen of my phone. I had sent high-resolution photos of the documents to my attorney the moment I snatched them. My phone vibrated. It was him. I walked a few paces away from the chaotic scene to answer. Everly, my lawyer said, his voice crackling slightly over the coastal connection. I am looking at the penalty clauses on page 42. If you press charges right now and shut this production down, the network can and will sue the primary tenants and the guarantors for breach of contract. The penalty for failing to provide the agreed-upon location is steep. We are talking about $1,500,000 in immediate damages, plus all pre-production costs. A profound, terrifying calmness suddenly washed over my entire body. The furious heat in my chest evaporated, replaced by the freezing precision of a seasoned chess player who just saw checkmate 5 moves ahead. If I sent my parents to federal prison for forgery today, it would be a messy public scandal that might drag my name through the mud anyway. But if I let them proceed, if I gave them exactly what they wanted, I could let their own towering greed crush them under a mountain of inescapable debt. I walked back to the police sergeant. I took a deep breath, forcing my eyes to well up with manufactured sympathetic tears. "Officer," I said, my voice trembling perfectly, "there has been a terrible miscommunication. These are my family members. I did not realize my parents had finalized this arrangement on my behalf. Please let them go. I am dropping the trespassing charges." Declan let out a loud, obnoxious sigh of relief, while Sloane visibly preened, shooting me a triumphant, venomous smirk. Later that afternoon, I arranged a conference call with my parents, Declan and Sloane. I played the role of the defeated, exhausted daughter flawlessly. I told them that while I was deeply hurt by their deception, I absolutely could not bear the thought of sending my own father to a federal penitentiary for document fraud. I agreed to let them use the property for the 90 days of the filming period. The line erupted into cheers. My mother cried tears of joy, praising my sudden return to proper family values, while Arthur pompously lectured me about how this was the right choice for our legacy. Sloane did not waste a single second. Within 2 hours, she posted a new video to her millions of followers. She was sitting in the passenger seat of Declan's car, beaming brightly. "Hey guys," she sang into the camera. "I just wanted to say that love and family always win in the end. The toxic energy has been cleared, and our beautiful coastal home is officially ours to share with the world. Keep manifesting your truth, because the universe always punishes the greedy and rewards the pure." She was practically drowning in her own delusion. I let her have her victory lap. I had actual work to do. The production company had scheduled a 1-week delay to reorganize their equipment after the police incident. I used those exactly 168 hours to execute a covert extraction. I hired a private, highly discreet moving company from 3 towns over. Under the cover of darkness, we stripped my sanctuary bare. We packed up my original oil paintings, my irreplaceable antique Persian rugs, and every single piece of custom-built, high-end furniture I had meticulously curated over the years. We moved it all into a secure, climate-controlled storage unit. In their place, I ordered a massive delivery of cheap, gaudy rental furniture. We brought in fake velvet sofas, hollow plastic tables painted to look like solid marble, and flimsy metallic light fixtures. To the untrained eye, or through the lens of a reality television camera, the house looked like a flamboyant billionaire's playground. In reality, it was a cheap movie set. There was absolutely nothing left inside those walls of any true financial or sentimental value. My final move was the most critical. I requested a private off-the-books meeting with the senior executive producers of the network. They were already nervous about the police incident and desperate to keep the project on track, having already sunk over $400,000 into marketing and crew retainers. I slid a newly drafted legal addendum across the polished mahogany table of their Los Angeles office. It explicitly acknowledged me as the sole undisputed legal owner of the property. It granted them permission to film, but it was loaded with microscopic lethal traps. I inserted clauses mandating strict adherence to all municipal noise ordinances, a zero-tolerance policy for any illegal substances on the premises, and mandatory daily safety inspections. The masterstroke was the termination clause. I retained the absolute unconditional right to revoke their filming permit and lock them out of the property instantly without any prior written warning if even a single rule was violated. The executives hesitated, sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. But the alternative was scrapping the entire show and losing their initial investment. They had no choice. They signed the addendum legally binding the production company to my absolute authority. I made them swear on their professional careers that they would not mention this new contract to Declan or Sloane. The talent, I argued, needed to feel completely relaxed and unburdened by legalities to give the best performance. The producers agreed. The trap was now fully set, spring-loaded, and hidden under a thin layer of cheap fake velvet. All I had to do was wait for my brother and his flawless fiancée to walk right into it. The moment the red recording lights blinked on, Sloane morphed into a caricature of coastal royalty. Through the secure backdoor access I had maintained to the internal camera feeds of my smart home system, I watched the absolute circus unfold from the quiet comfort of my corporate office. She strutted around the living room in silk robes that dragged across the cheap rental rugs, pointing at my carefully selected fake chandeliers and pretending she had imported them from Italy for $50,000. To manufacture the necessary drama for reality television, Sloane began hosting wild, chaotic parties almost every single night. She invited dozens of her equally vacuous influencer friends. They spilled brightly colored sticky cocktails all over the fake velvet sofas and completely destroyed the hollow plastic tables I had provided by dancing on top of them in high heels. It was a spectacular display of vandalism, and I documented every single second of it. I sat at my desk with a hot cup of coffee, cheerfully logging timestamps into a massive encrypted spreadsheet. My legal addendum had strictly prohibited noise pollution, and Carmel is a town that protects its silence fiercely. I compiled the decibel readings from my smart home microphones, capturing audio peaks that easily reached 110 decibels well past midnight. I also recorded crystal-clear audio of Sloane standing in the master bathroom, completely unaware that the room microphone was hot. She was laughing hysterically with a friend about how she bought 80% of her followers and secretly hated her online fans, calling them gullible peasants. But the absolute golden ticket came during a massive pool party on day 14 of filming. Through the high-definition lens of the patio camera, I watched a silver tray of illegal narcotics being passed around freely among the guests in broad daylight. My zero-tolerance clause was officially breached. It was a blatant, undeniable violation of both the strict production contract and local state ordinances. Declan, meanwhile, was doing an exceptional job of digging his own grave. During a late-night confessional interview filmed in the study, he had consumed far too much expensive tequila. His face was flushed red, and his usual practiced charm had melted into sloppy, ugly arrogance. "People think you have to work hard to get a place like this," Declan slurred to the producer off-camera, waving his glass around clumsily. "You do not. You just have to know how to play the game. We do not even own this house. My uptight, aging sister bought it. We just squeezed her a little bit, used the old family guilt trip, and snatched it right out of her cold hands. It is all about leverage, man. She is way too weak to fight back against Mom and Dad." I downloaded that specific video file and saved it to 3 different external hard drives. It was the purest form of poetic justice. He had just confessed to extortion and fraud on high-definition video fully recorded. Speaking of my parents, Arthur and Martha were determined to steal the spotlight. They descended upon the set like washed-up aristocrats, trying desperately to reclaim their lost glory. They had entirely convinced themselves that the network paycheck from this trashy reality show would elevate them to the upper echelons of high society. To look the part, they went on an astronomical spending spree. They maxed out every single credit card they owned to buy matching designer watches, bespoke Italian suits, and ridiculous leather handbags that cost upwards of $10,000 each. They strolled through the background of scenes, aggressively swirling expensive wine in their glasses and making incredibly pretentious comments about the local real estate market. They were drowning themselves in 30% interest rates, utterly blind to the fact that they were meticulously dressing up for their own financial funeral. They truly believed the massive payout from the show would easily erase hundreds of thousands of dollars in consumer debt. With my digital vault overflowing with concrete, undeniable evidence, I initiated the next phase of the operation. I did not confront them. I went straight to the local authorities. I anonymously forwarded the compiled footage of the noise violations and the chemical runoffs from their massive, irresponsible pool parties directly to the Carmel-by-the-Sea City Council and the local Environmental Protection Agency. The town officials were notoriously ruthless when it came to preserving the pristine nature of their wealthy coastline. Within 48 hours, the city began issuing massive daily fines, thousands of dollars a day, directly to the production company for violating environmental and residential zoning laws. The network executives started to panic instantly, but they could not legally touch me because my secret addendum completely shielded me from their operational liabilities. By the final week of production, the trap was pulled completely taut. I spent an entire weekend sitting in the sterile conference room of my lawyer's downtown office. Together, we assembled a terrifyingly thick legal dossier. It was a masterpiece of destructive litigation. We prepared a permanent restraining order to ban my entire family from ever stepping foot within 50 miles of my property again. We drafted a comprehensive defamation lawsuit against Sloan demanding severe financial compensation for the malicious internet campaign she had waged against me. And finally, we calculated an itemized invoice for every single scratch, stain, and broken piece of cheap rental furniture, billing it at an aggressively inflated rate as catastrophic property damage. The mountain of paperwork sat neatly inside a sleek black leather briefcase. Everything was perfectly aligned. The network had scheduled a massive, heavily promoted live stream event for the season finale, broadcasting directly from my living room to millions of highly engaged viewers. They wanted a dramatic, unforgettable conclusion to their reality show. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. The evening air in Carmel-by-the-Sea was crisp and cool, heavily contrasting with the chaotic, suffocating heat radiating from inside my living room. The production company had aggressively hyped this live broadcast for weeks on end. It was the grand finale of their highly anticipated reality television train wreck, streaming directly to over 800,000 simultaneous viewers across multiple digital platforms. They wanted explosive drama, and I was about to deliver a masterclass in it. I parked my car 2 blocks away in the shadows of the coastal pines. I stepped out onto the pavement, methodically smoothing down the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray designer power suit. Flanking me on my right was my lead attorney, his face completely unreadable as he carried a sleek, heavy black briefcase. On my left was the local county sheriff, his hand resting casually near his utility belt, accompanied closely by 2 armed, uniformed deputies. We marched together down the quiet residential street in total silence. Through the massive custom glass windows of my property, I could clearly see the blinding glare of professional studio lighting rigs. Sloan was standing dead center in the living room, wearing a ridiculous, highly flammable sequined gown, twirling for a heavily stabilized camera. Declan was right behind her, popping a bottle of cheap champagne that sprayed wildly all over my rented hollow plastic floorboards. Arthur and Martha were hovering proudly in the background, tightly clutching their maxed-out, astronomically expensive designer bags, beaming with unearned, arrogant pride. I did not bother to knock. I pushed the heavy oak front door open, stepping directly into the glaring spotlight of the primary broadcast camera. The heavy, authoritative thud of the sheriff's boots echoed sharply over the blaring, obnoxious party music. The camera operator, purely operating on industry instinct, swiveled the heavy lens directly toward me, instantly broadcasting my unannounced entrance live to nearly 1 million people worldwide. Sloan froze instantly. The fake, high-pitched laughter died completely in her throat. "Everly," she gasped, her eyes darting frantically between my emotionless face and the armed police officers. "What are you doing here? You are ruining the live feed." I did not spare her a single glance. I walked straight to the center of the room, standing directly in front of the primary broadcasting camera. I unclasped the metal locks of the black leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legally binding documents, and slammed them down onto the sticky champagne-soaked plastic table with a deafening, echoing crack. I am exercising my absolute right as the sole legal owner of this property, I announced. My voice was completely steady, cold as ice, and ringing with absolute authority. Effective immediately, this television production is permanently shut down. Every single one of you is trespassing. The senior executive producer, who had been aggressively monitoring the live feed from my kitchen island, rushed forward, his face suddenly pale and sweating profusely. "You cannot do this right now," he hissed, trying to keep his voice down. "We are broadcasting live to hundreds of thousands of people." "I am highly aware of the audience size," I replied coldly, turning to face him directly. "And you are highly aware of the secret legally binding addendum you signed directly with me last month. Your featured talent has repeatedly violated municipal noise ordinances, engaged in illegal, highly documented narcotics usage on my premises, and caused catastrophic property damage. You have exactly 10 minutes to clear every single piece of equipment out of my house before the sheriff begins making mass arrests." My attorney stepped smoothly forward, holding up a separate document bearing a heavy red official court stamp. "We are also serving an emergency eviction order right now. The primary lease is completely null and void due to severe criminal breach of contract." The executive producer stared at the official documents, then looked frantically over at the live viewer count monitor. The numbers were skyrocketing past 1 million simultaneous viewers as the unscripted real-life legal drama unfolded on their screens. He knew he was completely legally trapped. He also knew exactly how to save his own career and his network. He threw my family directly under the bus without a single second of hesitation. "Do not cut the feed," the producer yelled to his camera crew, his eyes manic. He then turned furiously toward Declan and Sloan. "The entire show is canceled. You repeatedly lied to us about owning this property. You severely breached the conduct clauses. We are officially activating the penalty clause in your contract right now." My father Arthur suddenly pushed his way to the front of the room, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "What penalty clause? We are the breakout stars of this network. You cannot cancel anything. We bought these clothes for the red carpet." My lawyer looked at him with absolute clinical pity. "Arthur Hunter, as the primary legal guarantor on the fraudulent lease agreement, you are now legally liable for the production cancellation fee. The network will be suing you for exactly $1,500,000 in immediate financial damages. Given your current highly leveraged financial status, they will be forced to foreclose on your primary residence to satisfy the debt." The $10,000 designer handbag slipped from my mother's trembling fingers, hitting the floor with a dull, pathetic thud. Her knees buckled completely and she collapsed onto a cheap rented velvet sofa, letting out a horrific guttural wail of sheer terror as the absolute reality of her impending bankruptcy crashed down upon her. Then Sloan completely snapped. The polished, sweet, mindful influencer persona shattered into a million jagged pieces. She threw herself onto the floor, kicking her expensive heels and screaming vile obscenities at the top of her lungs. She hurled a glass vase directly at an expensive lighting rig, shrieking that her life was ruined, that she hated her fans, and that she was fundamentally entitled to my lifestyle. Every single curse word, every violent movement, every ugly ounce of her true venomous nature was captured in high definition and streamed live to the entire internet. The live chat scrolling on the monitor beside the camera was moving so fast, it was a complete blur filled with millions of users universally canceling her. Her entire digital empire evaporated into digital dust in less than 5 minutes. Amidst the screaming and the frantic packing of the terrified production crew, Declan stumbled toward me. He looked utterly pathetic, completely stripped of his arrogant, boyish grin, his eyes wide with desperate, suffocating panic. "Everly, please," he begged, his voice cracking, reaching a hand out toward my suit jacket. "You have to stop this. You are my big sister. We will lose absolutely everything. Mom and Dad will go to jail. Please just give us the house. Save us. I looked at him. I searched my heart, and I felt absolutely nothing. There was no pity, no regret, no lingering familial bond. I turned away from him, looked directly into the glass lens of the main broadcasting camera, and delivered my final statement to the world. I gave you a wedding gift, Declan. It is the vital lesson to never build your future on the stolen property of someone else. I signaled the sheriff to begin the physical removal of the trespassers and walked out the front door, leaving them to burn completely in the inferno they had built entirely for themselves. The aftermath of that night was swift and beautifully brutal. I completely and legally changed my phone number, my private email addresses, and instructed my corporate security team to permanently block any digital or physical contact from my blood relatives. The television production company aggressively sued Arthur and Martha, seizing their home and forcing them to declare total bankruptcy in federal court. Sloan faced massive defamation lawsuits from my legal team and was permanently banned from all major social media platforms. Declan, drowning in legal fees and public humiliation, was left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of his own unearned entitlement. Tonight I am sitting alone on the pristine wooden balcony of my Carmel-by-the-Sea sanctuary. The house has been entirely refurnished with my actual beloved belongings. The only sound is the gentle crashing of the ocean waves against the rocky shore and the soft clinking of ice in my glass of expensive vintage wine. I am enveloped in absolute glorious peace. Sometimes the sweetest, most devastating revenge is simply stepping aside and letting greedy people destroy themselves completely with their own boundless greed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Vivian Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.